The Iron and Dust Ransom. 5 mail-order brides were being sold off in a dusty warehouse until a lonely rail driver kicked down the door and changed everything. Who's next, Vance? That one Brazilian, I think. Flexible as wet willow. Who will open the bid? Laughter cracked like gunfire across the warehouse, thick with coal smoke and spilled gin. Men crowded shoulder to shoulder, their boots grinding soot into the floorboards, eyes shining with hunger that had nothing to do with food. Kalen Reed leaned against the loading dock like he owned the sun, a smirk tugging one corner of his mouth as he waved his hand lazily toward the platform. "Elena," he drawled, tapping the registry book with a stained finger. "A dancer from Rio. Legs for days and no complaints." "Who'll start?" A grizzled man holding a half-empty jug lifted his hand. "2 jugs of shine and a pack mule," Reed sneered. "She ain't a fence post." "Let's not insult the lady." Elena stood under the lamplight, her green dress torn at the hem, bare shoulders proud despite the bruise along her collarbone. Her eyes scanned the room, cold as the mountain breeze, fixed on no one. The way she held her spine straight said she had survived worse than this crowd. Beside her stood 4 other women, each broken in a different way. Sloane's arms were crossed, jaw clenched, her wrists still bearing the purple stains of rope burns. Her father had traded her to settle a debt at the card table. Her stare promised hellfire. Mina stood silent, hands clasped like in prayer. Her lips were dry and split, her eyes distant. She hadn't spoken since her last husband tried to drown her in a creek and left her for dead. A long white scar ran beneath her chin. Martha was older, plain as dishwater, with a matron's apron still tied tight around her thin waist. She had been expelled from her wartime post for aiding wounded enemy boys. Now she stared at the floor as if reading the names of the dead. And Lila. Lila was the smallest, barefoot, tattered tan dress slipping from one shoulder. Her tangled hair looked as if it had never met a brush. Locals called her haunted, claimed she whispered to shadows and slept with her eyes open. Her gaze stayed fixed on the sliding doors, not pleading, not angry, just waiting. That was when they opened. The machinery had gone quiet hours ago, but the thud of boot heels across wood drew every eye. A tall figure filled the threshold, long coat dusted with iron grime, hat shadowing his face. He moved like someone who didn't mind if he got shot, just preferred not to. "Evening, Silas Thorne." His voice was rough, like river rock rubbed smooth by years. "Got a delivery in town. Thought I'd stop in for a drink." Reed chuckled, gesturing grandly. "Well, Thorne, you're just in time for the show. Pick your poison, ladies, tonight." Silas didn't laugh. His eyes traveled to the women at the stage, resting first on Elena, then Sloane, Mina, Martha, and finally on Lila. His brow twitched just a little. The girl was no older than 20, pale and shaking, her fingers wrapped around the frayed hem of her dress like a lifeline. A man behind Reed reached up suddenly, grabbing a handful of Lila's hair. "Let's see the teeth on this one," he jeered. "Bet she bites." The shot cracked like lightning. The bottle in his hand exploded, spraying glass and gin across his shirt. He yelped, stumbled back. Smoke curled from the barrel of Silas's revolver, which he had drawn so fast most men hadn't seen him move. "Don't touch her," Silas said quietly. The room froze. Reed blinked. "You just shot a bottle," he said carefully. "Not a man, so let's hope that was your warning." Silas stepped forward slowly, deliberately. The floor creaked under his weight. "I'm not here to bid," he said. "Not here to bargain." "Then why are you here?" someone spat. Silas stopped just short of the stage, his eyes locked on Reed's. "I'll take them all," he said. "Every last one?" the crowd murmured, a mixture of disbelief and derision. "All 5? Reed raised a brow. "You drunk or just foolish?" Silas reached into his coat. Slowly, no sudden moves. He withdrew a pouch and dropped it onto the wood. It hit with a dull, solid thunk. When Reed opened it, his smile faltered. Inside was silver. Real silver. Not coin shaved thin, but full rounds gleaming under the light. "They're not cattle," Silas said. "They walk out with me now." No one moved. Reed stared at him, then at the women. Finally, Sloane stepped down from the platform. Then, Elena, chin high. Mina followed, trembling but steady. Martha nodded once before joining them. Lila hesitated. Silas extended his hand. She took it. Her fingers were cold. And then they walked past the stunned crowd, out into the cold breath of night. "Stop them!" Reed's voice bellowed behind them, thick with rage and ale. "Get them back. I want that silver, or I want his scalp." Before the last syllable left his lips, Silas had already turned. "Move," he said low, and though his voice barely rose, it cracked like a whip through the air. The 5 women hesitated for the briefest of seconds. Then, Sloane grabbed Mina's elbow. Martha shoved open the side door near the dock and they plunged into the night. Silas covered their retreat, revolver still warm in his hand, boots pounding the wooden floor. Behind them came the scramble. Reed's hired men, 2 of them with rifles, another with a skinning knife, all grinning like the hunt had just begun. They burst into a narrow alley behind the warehouse, moonlight slicing through gaps in the old buildings. Mud clung to their boots. A broken ladder leaned against the back of a shop. Barrels lined the walls, reeking of oil and grease. "This way," Silas hissed, leading them toward the abandoned foundry at the edge of town. His hands swept low and sharp, signaling silence. The women followed, breath ragged, skirts soaked from puddles and filth. Inside the foundry, the dark pressed him like a second skin. Silas lifted a rusted latch, kicked open a back exit, and led them through stacked crates and old gears. Then came the shout. There in the alley, gunfire cracked. A bullet snapped into the doorframe just as Elena ducked past. Lila screamed but kept moving, gripping Mina's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. Beyond the foundry, a small gully cut through the dirt. Rainwater had carved a deep trench, slick and steep. Without hesitation, Silas jumped first, sliding down and landing hard. "Down," he barked. Sloane jumped. Then Elena. Then Martha, cursing under her breath. Mina froze for half a second, glancing back. Lila was still at the edge, trembling, too paralyzed to move. Mina turned around, grabbed her wrist. "Now," she shouted, or tried to. The sound never came, but her eyes screamed it loud enough. Together they fell, tumbling into the muck below. Silas looked up. His horse, tied near the rail yard earlier, had wandered close, startled by the gunfire. He ran for it, vaulted into the saddle, and turned to face the alley's mouth. Men spilled out from the foundry. One fired, the shot skimming past Silas's shoulder. "Keep going," he yelled back toward the women who were climbing the other side of the ditch now, scraping knees and pulling skirts, Lila being half carried by Mina. Silas kicked the horse into motion, riding at a diagonal to shield the group. With one hand he drew his second revolver, firing over his shoulder. The shots rang out clean and practiced. One man ducked. Another fell backward into the mud with a scream. A barrel tipped ahead of Silas. He leaned hard, arms scraping against the corner of a crate, wood splinters slicing into his skin. Blood bloomed across his sleeve. He did not slow down. The horse galloped ahead, hooves striking sparks from cobblestones. Behind them, shouts faded. Reed's men weren't prepared for a chase through a town that barely had a road. At the edge of a dried creek bed stood an old delivery cart, abandoned and half sunken in weeds. Silas jumped off, guided the horse beside it. "In," he told the women, already clambering up to the driver's perch. Sloane took the reins without being asked, surprising even herself. "I've handled worse things than mules," she muttered. The rest clambered in, Martha first, then Elena and Mina, Lila curling herself into the back. Silas mounted behind, scanning the horizon. "Hold tight," he muttered. The cart creaked and lurched forward. Behind them, no more gunshots, just the howl of wind and the scent of old rain rising from dirt. Mina was still gripping Lila's hand, as if letting go would mean drowning. Their chests rose and fell in near unison, cheeks smeared with mud. Martha wrapped her shawl around both of them. No one spoke. Silas rode behind them on horseback now, his face unreadable, but his gaze never left the cart. He checked their count. 5. He checked for injuries, none fatal. His sleeve was soaked through, pain biting at his arm, but he made no sound, just a silent nod to himself, and then to the road ahead. By the time they reached Silas's land, the stars were high and windless over the horizon. The wagon wheels clattered over dry soil as they passed a split fence, 2 posts leaning like old bones. His ranch sat alone at the edge of nothing. No neighbors, no town lanterns, just a squat wooden house weathered gray by sun and silence. The cabin looked like it had stood through storms without flinching. A porch leaned slightly to one side. One shutter hung loose, but the windows were intact, the door strong, and there was smoke curling from the chimney, as if the house had been holding its breath for years and was only now exhaling. Silas dismounted and opened the door without ceremony. "Ain't much," he said, voice low. "But it's dry." The inside was dim, lit by an old lantern hanging from a ceiling beam. There were 2 beds, one narrow cot in the corner, another larger but worn. A hearth sat cold and blackened, and against the far wall, a table scarred by knives and time. Shelves with chipped mugs, a water basin, a single mirror cracked in one corner. Sloane stood in the doorway, arms crossed, measuring everything like she might need to break it someday. Martha moved first. "It's clean," she murmured. "That's something." Elena lit the fire with kindling she found in a tin near the hearth. Mina and Lila huddled close together near the wall. Silas dropped his saddlebags by the door, pulled off his coat, and spread an old faded blanket onto the wooden floorboards. He folded it once, then again lay his coat on top as a pillow. Without a word, he sat on the edge of the hearth, wincing slightly. Martha saw it. The way he tilted his shoulder, the stiffness in his right arm. "You're hurt," she said. "Nothing needs fussing over." She stepped forward anyway. "Sit still." He didn't argue. She peeled back his torn shirt and saw the raw scrape down his upper arm and shoulder. Wood splinters, dirt, dried blood clinging to bruised skin. He smelled like smoke and horse and desert wind. She cleaned it gently with a cloth soaked from the basin, then wrapped it in a clean bandage from her old apron. "I've seen worse," she said softly, more to herself than him. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "You a nurse?" "Used to be," she answered. "Before they decided saving the wrong men meant I wasn't holy enough for the rest." He nodded once, said nothing more. Later, while the women found spots to sleep, some on the bed, some on coats laid out on the floor, Sloane sat near the door, her back against the wall, arms across her knees. Martha knelt beside her. "That man," she whispered, watching Silas as he stoked the fire with his uninjured arm. "He's not like the others." Sloane did not respond for a long moment, then muttered, "He's quiet." "That's rare." "Quiet's not the same as kind," Martha said. "But sometimes it's close." Out on the porch, Silas stepped into the still night, breathing in the scent of distant rain. Lila followed him quietly, barefoot, the hem of her dress brushing over dust and dried grass. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. The moonlight caught in her tangled hair, where bits of burrs and desert brush clung like remnants of escape. Silas reached out slowly, brushing the back of her head with fingers rough but gentle, pulling a thorn free. She flinched but didn't move away. "Got caught in the mesquite," he murmured. She looked up, met his eyes. They stood like that for a second. No longer stranger and fugitive, but something thinner, more human, the kind of pause that does not ask for words. Lila blinked once, then stepped back inside. Silas watched the door close softly behind her. He stayed out a while longer, listening to the wind carry coyotes' howls across the prairie like a warning too tired to bite. Inside the house, no one cried, no one prayed. But for the first time, the silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like breathing. The sun rose slow that morning, casting a dull red haze across the plain, as if it had changed its mind about shining. Silas was already outside splitting wood with steady, deliberate swings when he spotted a rider far off, a lone figure raising a trail of dust atop a chestnut mare. He looked like any courier from town, but the tight grip on a folded letter and the way his eyes darted to the house said something else. The rider dismounted stiffly near the old gate, boots crunching dry earth. "You Silas Thorne?" he asked. Silas paused, wiped the sweat from his brow, and nodded once. "Letter from the town council," the man said, his voice uneasy. "They're concerned about the women you got living here." Silas didn't take the letter right away. "What kind of concern?" "They say it ain't proper that you got no right keeping them. Some folks claim you stole them off, Reed." "They're not property," Silas said, voice low, steady. "Still," the courier continued, glancing nervously toward the porch. "They're talking about sending men. Law or not, when people get stirred up, things turn fast." Silas finally took the paper, but didn't unfold it. He looked toward the cabin. Mina stood inside the doorway, half in shadow, eyes wide and unblinking like a deer smelling thunder. "Tell them we heard," Silas said. "Tell them we're not hiding." The man gave a silent nod, mounted his horse, and rode back the way he came, faster this time. That night, they read the letter by lamplight. Martha held it with gloved fingers, careful not to crease it. The glow flickered across her face, casting shadows like cracks. "Return of unlawfully detained persons," she read aloud, each word like a nail. "Violation of community moral standards. Immediate compliance requested. Failure to comply may result in formal action sanctioned by church and civic authority." Sloane stood up so fast her chair skidded back. "They call us detained." Her voice cracked. "They want us to go back to that filth, to read." "They don't see us," Elena said, her tone bitter. "They see gossip, a stain on their prayers." Sloane clenched her fists, pacing like a storm trapped in a small room. "Let them come. I'll show them what fear feels like." "No," Martha said, rising slowly, her voice firmer than anyone expected. "That's not what we need." Sloane turned to her, furious. "Then what? Sit still until they burn us alive?" "We don't need to burn anything," Martha answered. "We need to exist, stay, live. Quiet, visible, undeniable. That's how we fight." Later, Silas sat on the porch sharpening his knife. Each stroke a thought. Clouds rolled in from the west, thick with threat. He watched the tree line, senses open, waiting. Inside, Mina checked every window latch. Lila sat by the hearth, unraveling a thread with calm, precise hands. Elena gripped a broom handle like a weapon. Martha folded fresh bandages into a tin. Then came the scent. Oil. Sharp, wrong. Glass shattered in the back room. A shout from Sloane. Fire. They ran outside. Flames licked up the side of the old storage shed, fast and hungry. Behind the blaze moved shadows, men with torches, faces half hidden in smoke. Silas did not hesitate. He ran for the flames. 2 attackers met him. One swung a rusted axe. Silas ducked, slammed into the second, knocked him down hard. The axe came again. Silas caught the handle mid-swing, twisted, punched, and drove his head into the man's nose. Blood flew. The second attacker clawed at Silas's neck. Silas turned, elbowed him sharply, and shoved him backward into darkness. A splash followed. The well. Then a scream. Lila was being dragged across the yard, one man yanking her arm. She kicked, twisted, cried out. Elena didn't think. She grabbed a broken post, charged, and swung. The blow landed with a sickening crack. The man shouted, reeled back. Lila fell to her knees. Mina rushed to her, pulling her away. Smoke thickened. The attackers scattered. Silas smothered the fire with a soaked blanket, stamping it out one spark at a time. When it was done, the shed was scorched but standing. They gathered on the porch, silent, breath ragged. Martha wrapped Lila in a coat. Sloane's knuckles bled. Mina gently wiped soot from Elena's face. Silas leaned on the railing, sweat and ash clinging to him. No one spoke. Inside, they left the door cracked open just an inch. Not because they weren't afraid, but because fear no longer got to close the door. The bell tolled over town like a funeral march, slow, deliberate, drawing in the righteous and the curious alike. Word had spread quick. Reed was calling for justice, armed with papers and fire in his voice. He claimed Silas Thorne had unlawfully taken 5 women from his establishment and turned them into something indecent. The town called it a prayer meeting, but everyone knew it was more. An unofficial trial dressed up in scripture. By the time the first hymn should have started, the church was full. The pews groaned under the weight of folks who hadn't stepped foot in holy ground since Christmas. Pastor Miller stood stiff behind the pulpit, looking more hostage than host, his hands gripping a stack of papers Reed had forced into them. Reed sat smug in the front pew, legs crossed, hair slicked, his best coat freshly pressed. He held a leather ledger against his chest like it was scripture. 2 of his bruised men who'd failed to take the women back by force flanked him, nursing silent grudges. Earlier that morning, he'd stood in the town square shouting, 1 man, 5 women. That's no homestead. That's a harem with better lighting. He stole them from my care and cloaked it in piety. Silas Thorne is no savior. He's a thief hiding behind kindness. The church doors creaked open one last time. Silas walked in, dust on his boots, hat in hand, face unreadable. He didn't look at Reed, didn't look at the crowd, just took a seat near the back. The 5 women didn't follow him in, but the memory of their presence, of what they'd endured, hung thick in the air. Pastor Miller cleared his throat. We've gathered today under concern. Allegations of unlawful detainment, of moral deviation. Mr. Reed believes his rights have been violated. Reed stood, slow and theatrical. He held the ledger high. Signed, sealed, witnessed. Those women were under contract, legal binding. I gave them shelter, food, work. He gave them lawlessness. The crowd murmured, torn between church manners and town gossip. Silas stood slow and sure. Where I come from, he said, voice carrying without effort. People ain't paper. Reed scoffed. Tell that to the 5 women sleeping under your roof. Silas walked forward, stepped past the pews and climbed the steps to the altar. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded sheet and dropped it on the pulpit. The original contract, the very paper Reed was trying to weaponize. Paper doesn't save people, Silas said, eyes steady. People do. Gasps fluttered through the room. Reed's face reddened. You don't get to decide what's legal. No, Silas said. But I get to decide what's right. From the side door, Mina appeared. She walked slowly, hands shaking just slightly, holding a small chalkboard. She stepped to the front and turned it around. Scrawled in white chalk were 4 words. Freedom does not ask permission. A hush spread across the congregation, thick as fog. Reed exploded. This is a circus. No. Martha's voice came calm and strong from the back. The circus was yours. Selling fear and calling it safety. Calling it work. Calling it salvation. Reed turned, seeking allies. But heads lowered, eyes looked away. No one stepped forward. Sloane entered next, arms crossed, fading bruises still visible along her jaw. You fed us fear, she said clearly. He gave us firewood. That's the difference. Reed turned to Pastor Miller. You're letting this stand? The pastor stared at the contract, then at Mina's chalkboard, then at Silas. Finally, he spoke. This church will not be used as a courtroom today, nor a cage. Reed's mouth tightened, his jaw twitched. He gripped the ledger tighter and stormed down the aisle, boots thudding against the wooden floor, echoing like judgment. He didn't look back, and though no one clapped, no one cheered, every soul in that room understood what had shifted. The women were no longer silent, and the town, for the first time, chose to listen. The days that followed the church meeting settled into a rhythm as steady as breath. No more torches, no more threats at the gate, only the low hush of wind sweeping across the plains and the thrum of simple labor filling the spaces where fear had once lived. Silas rarely spoke unless it mattered. He mended fences, hauled water, fed the hens before sunrise, but there were things he noticed. The way Lila limped slightly when the weather turned. The way she always tried to walk behind the others so no one would hear the drag of her heel across the floorboards. He said nothing of it, just watched. That evening, while the women were inside preparing supper, Silas sat alone in the barn. Lila's shoes rested in his lap, worn nearly through, soles flapping, one heel bent inward like it had long since given up trying to do its job. She had never complained, never asked for new ones, just kept walking. With the help of a small knife and a square of good leather from the tack box, Silas reshaped the inner lining, added padding where her ankle rubbed raw, and reshaped the heel to balance her gait. His fingers moved slow but sure, not rushed, the kind of care that came from understanding pain you could not erase, only soften. He left them outside her door just before dawn. Lila found them at sunrise. She bent down, fingers trembling slightly as she picked them up, then sat on the steps to slide them on. They fit not just her feet, but her, the way no gift ever had. She looked up. Silas stood across the yard feeding the horse, pretending not to watch. But when she turned fully toward him, shoes quiet on the porch, their eyes met. She didn't smile. She cried, not loud, just enough that her shoulders shook. Sloane, stepping outside with a basin of laundry, saw it. She paused mid-step, then turned back into the house, finding Martha at the sink. She's crying, Sloane said softly. Martha wiped her hands on a towel. Lila? Sloane nodded. He fixed her shoes. Didn't say a word. Just left them there like it was nothing. Martha smiled faintly. To her, it's everything. She deserves it, Sloane whispered. I just hope she believes that someday. Inside, Lila sat for a long time, running her fingers over the stitches. Mina passed by, paused, then knelt beside her. She did not speak. She only placed her hand gently on Lila's shoulder and nodded once, slow and certain. Lila leaned into the touch like a bird finding a branch that would hold. That night around the dinner table, the mood was quieter than usual, not somber, just full. Elena hummed a tune under her breath while stirring the stew. Sloane mended a shirt at the corner of the room, her hands moving without hurry. Lila kept glancing at Silas, and Silas, in his usual way, kept glancing back. No declarations were made, no love confessed. But when Lila passed him the bread, their hands touched just long enough to say, I see you. I trust you. I do not need more than that. Later, after supper, Lila lingered by the porch while the others cleared dishes. Silas came outside with his coffee, sat beside her without invitation. The silence between them was not awkward. It was patient. Familiar. My mother used to say, he said at last, you can tell a man's worth by how he cares for things that can't speak. Lila looked down at her shoes. They're not perfect, he added. But they'll hold, she nodded. They're the first thing that ever has. And in that moment, something passed between them, not romance in the storybook sense, not fiery or urgent, but something truer. A promise without pressure, a feeling stitched together, quiet as the thread he'd used to make her shoes whole again. The wind returned that night with a sharp bite, curling across the hills like it carried warning. Silas was checking the fence line, a gnawing feeling in his chest. From the porch, faint laughter spilled from the cabin. Lila telling Mina about stars that sang if you listen close enough. Then the horses stirred, stamping, snorting. Then the smell. Smoke. Silas turned. Flames were crawling up the stable roof, crackling dry wood into fire. Black smoke spiraled skyward. From the tree line, shadows emerged, figures with torches, rifles glinting. Reed had come back. This time, he brought war. Silas ran inside. The women were already moving. Elena grabbed a pail and shouted, "The horses!" Despite her limp, Sloane and Martha ran for the well. Lila screamed for Mina, who had gone outside earlier and hadn't returned. Elena vanished into the thick smoke. Inside the barn, a horse kicked wildly, trapped. Elena coughed, struggling to reach the latch. A timber above her cracked. Silas burst in, took the beam on his shoulder, shoved it aside. Elena clutched the horse's lead, dragging it out with Silas's help. She collapsed outside, soot streaking. "I got him," she rasped. Martha wrapped her in a blanket. Lila had gone after Mina, spotted her near the chicken coop, smoke rising behind her. Lila ran, skirts catching on bramble. Then Reed stepped out of the smoke. "She belongs to me," he shouted, grabbing Lila's wrist. She tried to pull back, but Silas was already there, rifle swinging. It slammed into Reed's ribs. They hit the dirt, fist flying. Silas fought with years of grief behind each blow. Reed punched back, split Silas's lip, but Silas did not fall. He tackled Reed, snarled, "You think you can buy people? Then burn what you can't keep?" Reed spat blood. "You think you're better? I don't think," Silas growled. "I choose." Reed reached for a blade, but Silas caught his wrist, twisted, and slammed him into the ground. He raised his rifle stock. Reed coughed, face pale. "Do it," he said. "Prove you're just like me." Silas froze, then lowered the weapon. "You're not worth remembering." Behind him, Lila and Mina emerged from the shed. Mina coughed hard, but she was safe. Martha rushed to help. Sloane and Elena stomped out flames with wet blankets. The barn had burned, but it stood. Silas dragged Reed to the edge of the ranch, tied him to his own horse. "You ride," he said, "and never come back." Reed didn't argue, just spat in the dirt and rode off. As dawn crept over the land, they stood in the ash, bruised, blackened, breathing. Sloane sat beside Elena, holding her hand. Martha leaned her head briefly on Silas's shoulder, then stepped aside so Lila could come closer. No words, only breath. Arms wrapped around one another. The barn had burned, but what mattered was still standing. Spring came slow that year, but when it arrived, it stayed. The ash from the fire had been cleared. New beams replaced the ones that burned. A fresh coat of whitewash covered the cabin walls. And yet what had changed most wasn't the wood or the roof or the fields, but the people inside them. No one left. The women who had once sat silent on a warehouse wall, waiting to be claimed like livestock, now moved through the ranch like they'd always belonged there. Because now they did. Lila and Silas were married one morning, just after sunrise. No priest, no audience beyond the four women who stood beside them, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes bright with something fierce and proud. Martha held Lila's bouquet made of wild sage and dried wheat. Mina braided a ribbon into her hair. Elena played a slow tune on a borrowed fiddle, the bow light and careful. Sloane stood beside Silas like a second witness, nodding when he stumbled over the words. There were no rings, just one promise. Silas took Lila's hands in his, voice steady. "You don't belong to me," he said. "You are yours, and I'm lucky because you chose to be near." Lila smiled then, small but real, a smile that had never existed in the warehouse or under any man's claim. She leaned forward and kissed him, not with trembling, not with fear, but with the surety of someone who had found home. After the ceremony, life didn't slow. It deepened. Sloane opened a saddle repair shop near the edge of town, close enough for customers, but far enough not to hear the gossip. She worked with her sleeves rolled up and her chin high, teaching young boys how to knot leather, and never apologized for being loud. Elena turned the old granary into a dance room, just one mirror, one wooden floor. She taught little girls how to move their hips like wind and their hands like water. Her limp remained, but so did her grace. Mina began visiting the schoolhouse. At first just to help sweep, then to teach a few signs to a mute child who stared more than spoke. Soon the whole town knew how to say friend with their fingers. And Martha returned to medicine. Not under a banner, not in a uniform, but in the homes of women in labor and old men too proud to say they were afraid. They called her Doc Martha. She never corrected them. No one grew jealous. In fact, it was the opposite. They grew stronger in each other's victories. They laughed louder over stew, shared boots and secrets in silence like treasure. They were not wives, they were sisters. One evening the table was full. Bread, beans, roasted roots, and laughter. Mina told a story with her hands, and everyone understood. Elena teased Sloane about the saddle order that had come in late. Martha threatened to make everyone drink her bitter tonic, and Lila, hair braided and cheeks flushed, leaned into Silas's shoulder with the ease of someone who knew she'd never have to ask permission to do so. Silas raised his cup, tapped it once against the table. "To peace," he said. They all nodded. Later that night, Lila stood at the porch rail, looking out toward the ridge. The stars blinked, soft and distant. Behind her, Silas joined her, quiet as ever. "You still glad?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. "Every day, because you're not mine, and I'm proud just to be near." Lila looked at him then, eyes full. "That's what love is supposed to feel like, isn't it?" He nodded. "Not a chain. A choice." They stood together a little longer. listening to the wind curl through the grass like a lullaby. Tomorrow the horses would need feeding, the shed needed paint, and life would go on. Not perfect, not easy, but real. But tonight they had each other, and that, in the soft hush of the morning light, was everything. Out here, in the dust and silence of the iron frontier, not every story ends with fireworks. Some end with a quiet porch, the creak of a rocking chair, and the kind of love that grows from courage, not conquest. Silas did not ride in to save anyone. He simply stood where no one else did, and made room for the broken to become whole again. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe love can bloom even in the hardest places, then saddle up and join us for more. Please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to US Wild West Love Story, where every tale is born from grit, danger, and devotion that defies the odds. Until next time, ride safe and love even safer. Would you like me to help with any more scripts or perhaps brainstorm some plot ideas for the next episode?